Hello, this is Ricky Sabia. I'm going to be speaking about the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, as it relates to students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. I am the National Down Syndrome Congress's Senior Education Policy Advisor. But one of my main inspirations for high expectations for this population of students is my son, Steve Sabia, pictured here. All through his educational career, we made sure he had the sorts of things you need to make sure that a student is going to get the most out of the curriculum. He was included in regular classes all the way through school. We used universal design for learning to help create access to the content for him. He was able to go on to a college program for students with intellectual disabilities, gain employment, and is now living in his own apartment with a roommate. So this is important to note just because there are a lot of people, when they think of students with the most significant cognitive disabilities who take alternate assessments, do not think that applies to somebody who has this level of competency. And there are very, very varied range of students who take this assessment, and it's important to know that you don't know when a student starts their education, what they will be able to accomplish, and giving them high quality education and high expectations is going to make all the difference. So we're going to start with participation in alternate assessments and a little background. Since 2003, there has been a 1% cap associated with the alternate assessments. 1% in this case refers to a number equal to 1% of all students assessed. And since only students with disabilities actually take an alternate assessment, it's important to note that that equals approximately 10% of students with disabilities, give or take, because it's dependent in some degree on the percentage of students in a state who actually have disabilities. So in NCLB, this cap referred to the number of advanced and proficient scores on the alternate assessment that could be used towards calculating proficiency for accountability purposes. Now under ESSA, they have the same 1% cap in terms of the numerical numbers, but the cap refers to something different. Instead of to advanced and proficient scores, this cap actually limits the number of students who can take the alternate assessment. In the past, you could have more students, arguably, taking the assessment, but only use those advanced and proficient scores up to the cap. Now, there cannot be more than 1% of all students assessed, approximately 10% of students with disabilities, taking an alternate assessment. This cap is applied at the state level, and which hopefully will put pressure on states to give schools better guidance for IEP teams to make sure the right students are actually taking that assessment. And there is concern about states applying for waivers of the cap, and there will be regulations on this issue coming out later in the summer. This graph gives you an idea of the percent of kids in the past who have been tested on alternate assessments. So this graph represents students with disabilities, and the different colors represent the different assessments that were in the past available. Right now, the only assessment that is available are the regular assessment and the alternate assessment. There are no other, the alternate assessment on alternate academic achievement standards. So as you can see, on the top of most of the states is a medium blue section. That represents the students who are taking an alternate assessment on alternate academic achievement standards. And you can see in most states, this represents around 10% of students with disabilities, which, as I said before, is about 1% of all students assessed. So it should not be difficult for states to be able to use that 1% cap that's now under ESSA on participation, and there really should not be need for waivers. Also want to talk a moment about the two alternate assessment consortia that were funded by the Department of Education back in 2010. One of them was the DLM consortium, Dynamic Learning Maps, and I provided you with some links to get more information about that consortia. and there's also the NCLB Alternate Assessment Consortia. I will point out that now, after the grant is over, they're calling it the Multi-State Alternate Assessment, which you might recognize from your state. And NCLB also went on, in addition to assessment, to creating instructional resources and a toolkit for building communication skills, which I've given you the link for. Both of these assessment consortia involve a great number of the states, and then there will be a question now as to how many states will continue to use this assessment or design something else. There were a number of very positive changes that NDSE was very involved in getting into the ESSA law to improve language that had been around alternate assessments in the regulations prior to ESSA. And these were all around trying to create the high expectations I talked about at the beginning. So one of these issues is enrolled grade state content standards. And there's always been a lot of confusions around the fact that the content standards for students who take an alternate assessment are supposed to be the same content standards as for all other students. The difference is in the achievement standards. So content standards represent what is taught in each grade. The achievement standards describe how much the students are expected to learn to be proficient on the assessment, and there are different achievement standards. The general assessment has achievement standard, and the alternate assessment has what's called the alternate academic achievement standard. And so all students are required to have instruction based on a roll grade content standards, and that's a very important piece to make sure there are high expectations. That when they just talk about grade level, it gets a little confusing for some people who think that that means a different grade level, but it really should be the enrolled grade level. Also, there's mention of pursuit and post-secondary education or employment specifically for students who take alternate assessments now. College and career readiness has always been a key focus of ESEA, but ESSA now clearly connects it to the alternate assessment, saying that students who are proficient on the alternate assessment should be on track to pursue post-secondary education or competitive employment. And it's very important. It's talking about competitive employment and tying it into the Workforce Investment and Innovation Act, because this is the kind of employment we're seeking for these students, not sheltered workshops. Also, another very important difference between the regulations under NCLB and the language in ESSA has to do with the curriculum, the general education curriculum in NCLB. It required states to promote access to the general education curriculum to the extent possible for students in alternate assessments, and this has been something that we've really been very concerned about. But under ESSA, we were able to get the language changed so that it now says that states must promote involvement in and progress in the general education curriculum, which is much more closely aligned to the expectations in IDEA, and that's very important for high expectations. ESSA also has language saying that there must be the opportunity to work towards a general regular diploma for these students. Under NCLB, a third of states automatically remove students who took an alternate assessment from the diploma track. And this means as young as third grade, they were taken off, and often in kindergarten, to track them into this off-diploma track. And now ESSA says the states cannot preclude these students from attempting to earn the regular high school diploma. Now, how that will play out, we will have to see, but they should be allowed to be working towards a diploma, stay on a diploma track, even if they never earn a diploma. This will help them get much more access to the grade level contents. There's also an alternate diploma provision that's new in ESSA. This was intended to be for graduation rates, basically saying that if there is a certain type of alternate diploma developed by the state, that students who take an alternate assessment who earn that diploma, they can be counted as if they graduated with a regular diploma for the purposes of calculating the graduation rate. And it's very important that no other type of alternate diploma other than what was defined in the statute can be used for this purposes, and its only use is for calculating graduation rate. So under the statute, this alternate diploma is required to be standards-based, aligned with regular diploma requirements, and obtained by IDA exit age for your state, which is usually age 21. This is not a regular diploma, as I said, for any other purpose. And also it's important to state that an IEP diploma, something that uses IEP goals, even if those IEP goals are standards-based, should not be considered an alternate diploma for these purposes. So education in the LRE is another issue that's very important to families who have students who take an alternate assessment. Now, ESSA doesn't mention least restrictive environment, but there are provisions to help parents make the argument for inclusion. And these two provisions are two I've already talked about, that the state must promote involvement in and progress in the general education curriculum for all these students, and that all students must be given the opportunity to attempt to complete the requirements for a regular high school diploma, even though it should not matter whether the student is working towards a diploma or not in terms of being able to be in the least restrictive environment. There's no limiting language around that. In IDA, a lot of times that has been used as an excuse, saying, well, they're not on diploma track, so they can't be in a regular classroom, so that at least helps defeat the specious argument that's being used against including them. Also, an argument that's often used as well, they're not, in the regular curriculum, general education curriculum. They have the separate curriculum, which also is not true. They are supposed to be in the general ed curriculum. That's clear in IDEA. But that argument is often used, and this language can be help defeat that. Accommodations are also very important. ESSA encourages development and dissemination of accommodations specifically to help more students take the general assessment. So that is the goal, to have as many students take the general assessment for the grade level as possible. And there are grants provided for professional development on the use of accommodations in instruction and assessment. Universal design for learning also appears now in ESSA. It is clearly recognized as an accepted practice, and this is in addition to the UDL language that's already in the Higher Education Act and in the National Educational Technology Plan. There are numerous references about assessment and UDL in the statute. But in addition to that, the large literacy grant in the ESSA incorporates UDL principles in the definition of comprehensive literacy instruction, and therefore that brings it into the whole instructional realm. And that language about comprehensive literacy instruction says it must be provided across all content areas. So this brings UDL into the realm of all content areas as well. And finally, providing here a slide on some National Down Syndrome Congress resources about ESSA. There are two about ESSA in the IEP. One is very short and one has more detailed information. There's also a document that will help you find the stakeholder activities in your state for providing input on the ESSA plan development, and to go with that, some general talking points that can be used. We are also in the process of developing some more specific recommendations for individuals involved in ESSA state plan development. So I would like to thank you for your time. This concludes this presentation.